Notice what you just noticed. Somewhere in the last few seconds, before you even clicked on this, something in you paused, not because anything around you changed. The room is the same. The light is the same. The noise outside your window hasn't shifted at all. And yet some part of you clocked a difference anyway. The way you'd sense a door standing open in a house where every door is usually closed. You can't see the door yet. You can just feel the draft. Most days, you'd talk yourself out of a feeling like that within a few seconds. It's easy to dismiss. No evidence, nothing you could point to, nothing you could explain to someone else without sounding like you're reaching. But stay with it for one more moment before you explain it away. Because this time, there's an actual mechanism behind the feeling, not just a mood passing through. That draft has a name, and it's older than almost anything else moving through the sky right now. Two of the slowest, heaviest planets we track, the one that governs sudden change and the one that governs deep, structural transformation, are locking into the easiest, most cooperative angle they can form with each other. And they have not done that at this kind of strength since the early 1920s, over 100 years, long enough that nobody currently alive was consciously awake for the last time it happened, long enough that when it last occurred, the structures being redrawn were things like international borders, radio as a new form of mass communication, and the entire architecture of how ordinary people related to institutions bigger than themselves. This time, the redraw is smaller in scale and much more personal. It's happening at the level of you, your vantage point, your floor plan, the rooms in your own life you've quietly stopped walking into. Here's why you're the one who gets to feel this so directly, even though the planets involved are so slow they barely register to most people in a single lifetime. It's because the moon, the fast-moving, deeply personal piece of your chart, the part that governs your mood by the hour rather than by the decade, is threading directly through this pattern over the next couple of days. The moon is what turns a generational shift into something you feel in your own chest on a Tuesday. Think of the outer planets as the architects redesigning the building from the outside, slowly, over years. Think of the moon as the person who actually walks through the finished rooms and notices the new window that's letting in light that used to be blocked. You're not imagining the shift. You're the one standing in the room when the light changes. So, let's actually walk through what's structurally different this week, because the specifics matter more than the vibe. The first thing worth understanding is the difference between the kind of planetary connection you're in now and the kind that made headlines a decade or so ago, when these same two slow planets were locked in a much harder angle, a square, the tense, friction-heavy connection that tends to crack things open by force. That configuration coincided with years that felt genuinely destabilizing on a global scale. Protest movements, financial upheaval, entire systems visibly straining under pressure they hadn't been built to hold. A square doesn't ask permission. It just applies pressure until something gives. This week is not that. This week, those same two planets are in a trine, geometrically the smoothest, most flowing angle 2 points can make with each other. A trine doesn't force a wall down. A trine finds the door that was already there and simply opens it. If the square years were about structures failing under pressure they couldn't survive, this window is about structures finally being allowed to change shape without a fight. That's a genuinely different kind of event, and it's worth naming clearly because most of what circulates about big outer planet transits defaults to crisis language. This isn't a crisis. This is closer to renovation, with the power still on. You get to keep living in the house while the new floor plan gets drawn. It's worth sitting with what was actually being rebuilt the last time this specific trine perfected, because it makes the architecture language less of a metaphor and more of a literal thread. The early 1920s were, structurally, a moment when entirely new systems of connection were being laid down at scale for the first time. Broadcast radio reaching into private homes, new transportation networks reshaping how far an ordinary life could reach, new institutions forming to hold a world that had just been through enormous upheaval and needed a different kind of scaffolding to stand back up. None of that happened because it was easy. It happened because the underlying angle at the time favored building smoothly instead of through collapse, the same flowing geometry currently overhead. The scale, then, was civilizational. The scale now, for you personally, is a single life. But the underlying mechanism, ease instead of crisis, as the engine of real structural change, is exactly the same one your great-grandparents' generation was standing inside without a name for it. You have the name. That's the only real difference. What does that actually look like day to day? It tends to look like clarity arriving without the drama that usually accompanies clarity. You might find yourself suddenly certain about something you'd been circling for months, not because a crisis forced the decision, but because the fog around it simply lifted. A relationship dynamic you'd normalized might suddenly look different in the light, not worse, just visible in a way it wasn't before. A belief you inherited and never examined might reveal itself as something you can actually renovate rather than something load-bearing you're stuck defending forever. None of this requires anything to fall apart first. That's the entire point of a trine. Ease is not the same as insignificance. Some of the most permanent shifts in a floor plan happen when nobody's forcing anything. Let's make this less abstract, because clarity as a word can float past you without landing anywhere specific. Picture the version of this that shows up in a career. You've been in a role, or a business, or a creative project that technically works, pays the bills, looks fine from the outside. But something about it has felt like living in a house built for someone else's proportions. Doorways slightly too low. Rooms slightly too small for what you actually need. Under this kind of trine, that mismatch tends to stop being a background hum and start being something you can actually name out loud, maybe for the first time. Not because the job changed, because your view of it did. Picture the version that shows up in a relationship, romantic, family, a long friendship, doesn't matter which. There's often a dynamic in a close relationship that everyone involved has quietly agreed not to look at directly, the way you avoid looking straight at a crack in a wall, because looking at it makes it real. This window has a way of making that crack visible without it needing to turn into a fight to get there. You might just wake up one of these mornings and see the pattern clearly. Who does the accommodating? Who does the deciding? What's actually being asked of you versus what you've been offering out of habit. Seeing it doesn't obligate you to blow anything up. It just means you're no longer pretending the wall is flat when it isn't. Picture the version that shows up in how you see yourself. A belief you picked up so early in life, you never filed it under opinion. You filed it under fact. Something like, I'm not the disciplined type, or people like me don't get to want big things, or it's safer to stay small. Beliefs like that function as load-bearing walls in the floor plan of a life, and most people never touch them because touching a load-bearing wall sounds dangerous. What this window tends to reveal gently is that a fair number of those walls were never load-bearing at all. They were just walls nobody had questioned in a long time. You get a rare, calm look at the actual blueprint this week, the real one, not the one you assumed was true because it had been standing so long. And picture finally the version that shows up in creative or intellectual work, the project you started and quietly abandoned, the idea you decided was too big for you, the thing you're genuinely good at but stopped mentioning out loud because nobody around you seemed to notice it. Jupiter's involvement in this pattern specifically favors expansion of exactly this kind, not a wild leap into the unknown, but a return to something you already know you're capable of, viewed now with more scale and less apology than you gave it the first time around. Sometimes this shift shows up in a way that's almost funny in how literal it is. Don't be surprised if, sometime in the next few days, you get a sudden, specific urge to rearrange actual physical furniture, move a desk to face a different direction, clear a shelf you've been avoiding, finally take down something on a wall that stopped meaning anything to you years ago. That's not a coincidence worth dismissing. The outer symbolism of this window is architectural, and symbolism has a habit of leaking into the literal world in small, practical ways. You don't need to interpret every transit metaphorically if your body is already asking for the real, physical version of the same message. Change the angle you're looking at your own life from, starting with the actual room you're sitting in. Now let's bring in the piece that's actually acting as the architect of this whole moment, the planet that just settled into a brand new sign for the first time in over a decade, and is now sitting at almost the exact same degree as both of the planets locked in that rare trine. This planet governs expansion, meaning, and the stories we tell ourselves about what's possible. And right now, it isn't just sitting near this pattern, it's actively wired into it, forming a smooth, flowing angle to one of the two planets in the trine and an opposition, a face-to-face angle, to the other. An opposition sounds tense on paper, and sometimes it is, but an opposition is also structurally the angle that forces two things into the same field of view at once. It's the angle that makes you actually look at both sides of a room instead of only the half you're comfortable facing. Combined with the smooth flowing connection this same planet is making to the third point in the pattern, what you get is less conflict and more a very wide-angle lens. This week, you're not just seeing your immediate surroundings. You're seeing further down the hallway than usual, and you're seeing what's directly across from you at the same time. That's an unusually complete vantage point to be handed all at once, and it's the direct result of this newly arrived planet acting as the connective piece, the beam that ties the whole structure together instead of leaving two rare planets simply trine each other in isolation. That third point matters on its own terms too. It's the planet tied to imagination, to the stories that hold a life together before logic ever gets involved, to the parts of yourself you sense before you can explain them. A smooth angle between the newly arrived expansion planet and this imaginative one tends to soften the whole week in a specific way. It's less about forcing a decision through sheer willpower, and more about letting yourself actually picture the version of your life you want without immediately talking yourself out of it. Most people skip that step entirely. They jump straight from here's the problem to here's the practical fix, without ever letting themselves fully imagine what they're actually building toward. This particular angle makes room for the imagining part. Not fantasy for its own sake, imagination as the actual first draft of any real structural change. Nothing gets built without someone picturing it first. Before we go further, it's worth answering the question you might already be asking. If this is such a rare configuration, why would every sign feel it, rather than just one or two? Most astrological content zooms straight to the personalized version. How this lands for your rising sign specifically, which house it's activating in your own chart, all of which is real and worth exploring eventually. But underneath that layer of personalization sits a layer that doesn't check anyone's birth chart before it applies. The sun changing signs is collective weather everyone stands in, the same way everyone stands under the same actual sky, regardless of which city they're in. The moon's fast movement through this pattern is the same for every chart on the planet on the same day. It just lands on different rooms of the house, depending on your personal layout. So the specific flavor will vary. The sign that rules your career versus the sign that rules your relationships will filter this differently depending on where these planets fall for you individually. But the underlying pressure, the underlying invitation toward clarity, is genuinely collective. That's the part that doesn't discriminate by sign. Everyone's looking at the same shifting light. You're just standing in a different room of the house than the person next to you. There's a second layer to this that deserves its own moment, because it's the kind of detail that separates a genuinely rare configuration from a merely interesting one. All four of the outer, slow-moving planets currently involved in this pattern. The two in the historic Trine, the one that just arrived and is bridging them, and one more sitting quietly in the background, are clustered at almost the identical early degree of their respective signs. Not the same sign, the same narrow degree range, across four completely different signs and four completely different areas of the sky. That kind of tight structural symmetry, where the actual geometry lines up this cleanly across multiple, slow-moving points at once, is not something that happens on any kind of regular schedule. It's less like four instruments playing the same note, and more like four instruments built decades apart in different keys that happen to be perfectly in tune with each other for one specific measure. You don't get many measures like that in a lifetime. Think about what that symmetry actually means structurally, rather than just numerically. Four separate independent systems, each one moving at its own speed, on its own multi-decade or even multi-century clock. Each one governing a completely different area of experience, briefly locking into the same narrow degree band at once. It's the difference between four clocks that happen to show the same time by coincidence, and four clocks that were built to different specifications entirely, running on completely different mechanisms that still land on the same second. The second kind of alignment isn't more true than the first, but it's rarer. And rarity tends to matter to the part of you that's paying attention right now, whether or not you could explain exactly why. You don't need to track four planets by degree to feel the effect. You just need to notice that more than one part of your life seems to be shifting into focus at the same time, instead of one thing at a time, the way change usually arrives. That's the outer signature of this inner symmetry. Things that felt unrelated a month ago might start looking like the same underlying pattern, viewed from four different rooms. It's also worth naming what comes directly after this window closes, because it changes how you might want to use these next few days. Within about a week of this trine perfecting, the lunar nodes, the axis that marks where you're being pulled toward growth versus where you're being pulled back toward comfort, shift into a brand new sign for the first time in about a year and a half. That shift has its own separate story, but the timing overlap matters here. This rare, ease-filled window is closing right as a much longer multi-year cycle is opening its next chapter. Doors that are this easy to walk through rarely stay easy for long, not because anything is working against you, but because ease like this is a season, not a permanent climate. You're not on a deadline in a fear-based sense. Nothing bad happens if you don't act by a specific hour. But there's a real difference between doing this kind of internal work while the door is standing open on its own, versus doing it later, once you have to force the door yourself. Both are possible. One is considerably less effort. Let's talk about where the sun is in all of this, because the sun is what determines the general emotional weather everyone's walking through, regardless of their personal chart. Right now, the sun is finishing its long stretch through the sign that governs home, memory, emotional safety, and the private architecture of your inner life, the parts of the house nobody else gets a tour of. And it's standing right at the threshold of moving into the next sign, the one that governs visibility, self-expression, and the parts of your life that are actually meant to be seen. That threshold matters. You're not just living through a rare planetary trine in the abstract. You're living through it at the exact moment the general emotional current is shifting from build it quietly, in private, to let it be seen. The timing of your own inner renovation and the outer light turning toward visibility just happen to be overlapping. And that overlap is doing a lot of the emotional heavy lifting behind why this particular stretch of days feels different from an ordinary Tuesday, even before you know a single astrological term involved. And then there's the moon, which is the part of this story that explains the why today specifically question better than anything else. Over the course of these few days, the moon moves through a sign that values balance and comparison, then crosses into a sign that goes straight for what's actually true underneath the surface, skipping past the polite version entirely. Along the way, it makes a tense angle to the planet associated with structure, limits, and reality checks, the kind of angle that tends to surface a "this isn't sustainable anymore" feeling, often first thing in the day, often about something you'd been quietly tolerating. That particular planet doesn't create problems that weren't already there. It just refuses to let you keep pretending they're not. Under ordinary circumstances, a Moon to Saturn tension like that can feel a little heavy, a little like being handed a bill you forgot you owed. But arriving right in the middle of this larger, easier pattern, it plays a different role than usual. Less, here's what's wrong with you. More, here's the one honest data point you need before the rest of the week can actually help you. Not long after, the moon swings into a smooth, easy angle with both of the planets locked in that historic trine, back to back. That's the mechanism. That's why a slow-moving, generational, once-a-century pattern that most people would never consciously notice suddenly becomes something you feel directly, personally, almost physically, on an otherwise ordinary day. The moon is the translator. It takes something the size of a century and hands it to you in a size you can actually carry. One more piece worth naming, honestly, because pretending it isn't there would make this a less complete picture. The messenger planet, the one that governs communication, thinking, and decision-making, is still moving backward through the sky this week, in the final stretch of a retrograde that began a few weeks ago and is close to ending. Retrograde periods get a reputation for chaos, but what they're actually built for is revision, not start over. Revision, going back over something you already built and adjusting it now that you can see it more clearly. Paired with everything else happening this week, this isn't a great stretch for launching something brand new from zero. It's an excellent stretch for going back to a half-finished plan, a message you never sent, a conversation you cut short, or a decision you made too quickly, and actually finishing it properly now that the fog has lifted. The blueprint doesn't need to be thrown out. It needs a second look with better light. Concretely, that might mean the draft you wrote and never posted, the apology you've been composing in your head for weeks but haven't actually said out loud, the application, the pitch, the difficult conversation with someone close to you that you started and then quietly let drop when it got uncomfortable. Under most conditions, going back to something unfinished can feel like admitting defeat. Under this specific window, it tends to feel more like finishing a sentence you already started, now that you actually know how it ends. The combination of a backward-moving messenger planet and a forward-opening structural trine is an unusual pairing. One says, "Look back," the other says, "The door is open." Together, they suggest the most efficient way through isn't a brand new door. It's the one you already have your hand on. Worth being precise about one thing before we go further. Ease is not the same as comfort. A trine removes the crisis, not necessarily the honesty. You can walk through an open door and still find the room on the other side asks something real of you. It's just asking without also setting the house on fire to get your attention. So if some of what surfaces for you this week stings a little, that's not a sign the trine is somehow failing to be gentle. Gentle and painless aren't the same word. You might feel real grief about time spent defending a wall that was never load-bearing. You might feel a flash of anger at whoever taught you it was dangerous to touch it in the first place. Both are allowed. Ease just means you get to feel those things without a structural collapse forcing your hand at the same time. Which, if you've ever been through the harder version of a transit like this, you already know is a genuine mercy. There's a trap worth naming before we get to what to actually do with any of this. Because a trine is quiet, it's easy to scroll straight past it. The same way you'd walk past an open door if you'd trained yourself for years to expect every door to be locked. Loud transits get attention because they demand it. Something breaks, something ends, something forces your hand. Quiet transits like this one ask something harder, that you notice them on purpose, without the universe making you. Plenty of people will let this exact window pass by completely unused, not because it wasn't available to them, but because nothing about it was loud enough to interrupt their day. You clicked on this, which already puts you ahead of that. The rest is just choosing to actually look, instead of assuming that because nothing is on fire, nothing is happening. It's worth naming directly that you'll likely see this same window described elsewhere as something to brace for, a final warning, a countdown, a reason to panic before some invisible deadline passes. That framing sells clicks, but it doesn't match the actual geometry. A trine has never once, in the history of anyone tracking these things, been the angle associated with disaster. Squares and oppositions carry tension because tension is genuinely part of their nature. A trine's nature is ease, and pretending otherwise for the sake of a scarier hook isn't more accurate, it's just louder. You don't need to be frightened into paying attention to something that's actually on your side. You just need it explained clearly enough to see why it matters, which is the entire point of walking through the mechanics the way we just did, instead of skipping straight to a warning label. So what actually shifts if you let yourself engage with this instead of scrolling past it? The honest answer is probably not your circumstances, at least not immediately. Trines don't rearrange your external life for you while you sit there. What shifts first is your vantage point, the angle you're viewing your own life from. And vantage point is not a small thing to have handed to you for free. Most people spend years trying to gain the kind of perspective this week is offering without a fight, the relationship you couldn't get clarity on, the career decision you kept talking yourself out of examining, the belief about yourself you inherited so early you forgot it was ever optional. This window tends to make those things visible without requiring the usual crisis to force the visibility. That's the actual gift here. Not answers handed to you, but the fog lifting enough that you can finally see the layout of the room you've been standing in the whole time. What you do with that visibility is still entirely yours. Nothing about this configuration removes your agency. If anything, it hands more of it back to you than usual, because clarity without crisis means you get to choose your next move deliberately instead of reactively. You're not being forced through a door. You're being shown that the door was never locked. This also isn't a one-day event, even though the peak of the exact geometry is tight. The effect tends to linger across the coming days and weeks, gradually loosening rather than snapping shut. If nothing lands for you the moment you finish watching this, that's fine. Give it a few days. Clarity like this often arrives sideways, in the middle of an unrelated conversation, or in the quiet 10 minutes before sleep, rather than on command. Your job isn't to force insight into today specifically. It's to stay a little more awake than usual for the next stretch of days, so that when the insight does arrive, you actually notice it instead of letting it pass by, unclaimed, the way the loudest version of you might have a year ago. If you want a way to actually work with this, instead of just watching it happen, try this. Before the day is out, find one belief, one relationship dynamic, or one decision you've been treating as load-bearing, something you assumed you couldn't touch without the whole structure coming down, and just look at it directly for 5 honest minutes. Not fix it, not decide anything permanent. Just look at it in the new light and notice what you actually see now that you couldn't see before. That's the whole exercise. Comment the one word that describes what came up when you did. Clarity, discomfort, relief, something else entirely. Because the pattern in those comments tends to be its own kind of interesting, and it helps this channel keep tracking what's genuinely landing for people versus what's just noise. If you're new here, this is also a good moment to subscribe, since the specifics change every single time, but the underlying approach, real data, no manufactured panic, doesn't. Here's what's true underneath all of it. The planets don't build anything for you, and they never have. What a window like this does is remove some of the resistance between you and a version of your own life you can already half see from where you're standing. The last time this exact trine perfected, none of the people reading this were alive to feel it. You are alive for this one. That's not a small coincidence to sit with. Go back to the very start of this video for a second. That draft you felt before you even knew what caused it. The sense of a door standing open somewhere just out of view. You know what it is now. You know roughly why it's rare, why it's landing on you specifically instead of staying an abstract event in the sky, and what it tends to make visible when you actually turn toward it instead of past it. That's more than most people get handed about a moment like this, and it's more than you had access to a few minutes ago. None of it obligates you to do anything. A door standing open is not the same as a door pulling you through it. You're allowed to notice the draft, register the room feels different, and simply keep living your day exactly as planned. That's a valid response too, and nothing about this window punishes stillness. Stillness has never once been the thing that costs you here. The only thing this window can't do much with is a mind that refuses to look at all. But if some part of you has been waiting for permission to actually look at the load-bearing wall you've been avoiding, or finish the sentence you started weeks ago, or picture the bigger version of the thing you quietly gave up on. This is about as much permission as the sky tends to hand out. You get to choose what you build in the rooms this light is currently reaching. Nobody else gets to make that choice for you, and nobody else needs to. The view just got clearer. What you do with it is, as always, entirely up to you.